Hey, this is Gratuitous. Welcome to Music Production Made Simple, the show that focuses on best practices about music production, which is based on FL Studio. If you're wanting to become the best producer you could be, subscribe and listen weekly. You can also check out my courses, which teach you the principles and basics of music production. They'll get you up and running quickly. In addition, I also have books on Amazon and tons of music on Spotify. Always feel free to hit me up at hi@itsgratuitous.com. So let's get into the episode. All right, hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 15. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a quick startup with compression. Now, a compressor is a super cool tool. It has a lot of uses. In my early years, I actually found compression extremely tricky to understand, and most people do. And the reason for this is a lot of tutorials kind of dumb down a compressor. And the thing is, when you dumb something down so much, sometimes it's actually even harder to learn than if someone just told you straight up, what it is and how it works, I'm going to break down in this episode, how a compressor works, best practices in a sense of how to kind of set up a compressor to get it going for you. Just to let you know, I also have a course on compression too, okay? Because the thing is, when you're kind of new to producing, you watch all these tutorials about, they're showing you how to use a compressor and stuff like that. The reason why I created this course is specifically as like a beat maker, like how we beat makers can use compression in our beats, creatively and, in our everyday uses, okay? So the course is called Why We Producers Use Compression. And again, on my website, I offer a membership. It's just $10 a month, or you can do a lifetime membership. It's just a one-time payment, or you can just purchase the course just by itself, okay? I just want to also give you a little update about my microphones, the shotgun microphones, okay? So I got them shipped in off of Amazon there. And again, the reason why I wanted the shotgun microphone is because I wanted a high-quality audio. I want a microphone that picks up my audio directionally, because now I have a green screen and I don't want you guys to see the microphone in the course. I want to be able to talk with the green screen without the microphone and, high quality and stuff like that. So I purchased two microphones. I wanted to try in between them and I was going to return one. So it was a Sennheiser MKE600. And then the other one was an Audio-Technica AT897. And I actually like the Sennheiser better. I just felt that the actual build quality of the Sennheiser just felt better. I believe there's kind of like a German company, made in Germany. Anything made in Germany is just amazing, right? But obviously the sound is what really matters, right? So when I actually compared it, they both sounded pretty good in terms of, it picked up my voice very naturally, but I found that the Audio-Technica was quite aggressive on my S's. So therefore, I'm going to be going with the Sennheiser MKE. I'll be returning the Audio-Technica. And the reason for that is because, when I'm editing videos and stuff like that, if I always have to focus so much on the S's, and that means I have to always DS, and it's just really, really annoying to always focus on that. You want high quality audio, and the Sennheiser, I was very, very happy with it. Okay, so again, that's the Sennheiser MKE 600 if you want to check it out. Okay, so let's get into the actual episode. So, again, like I'm saying, so a compressor is probably one of the hardest tools that you're going to have to learn as a producer. You're going to hear this all throughout the industry. And, so what you have to learn about a compressor is, first of all, how it works in a sense of, yes, the threshold, ratio, attack, and release, which we'll cover in a moment. But then you also have to train your ear to know what you're listening for, okay? And one of the trickiest things for me when I was starting up, watching tutorials and stuff about, what is a compressor? What's the point of a compressor? How does it work? Was really understanding, what does a compressor even do? So there's actually different uses of a compressor, okay? So, you could be using a compressor for volume balancing, but the easiest way to think of a compressor is just like an automatic volume knob, okay? So imagine, you have this vocal and you can just simply use volume automation instead of using a compressor. And typically, it's probably better to use volume automation because it sounds more natural. A compressor can actually bring negative artifacts such as bringing up the sound of your room. For example, if you have your computer fan, or you could even just kind of sound just squashed. That's probably the best way I can describe it, is if you're too aggressive with a compressor. Whereas volume automation, you can use that, and that's probably the best way to start with a vocal, is to use volume automation. And there are even plugins out there which can do it for you automatically. So anyway, so you can use volume automation on this vocal just to kind of make those quiet words a little bit louder, make it more consistent. Therefore, all words are audible in the mix. And then you could be using a compressor creatively, which is, for molding and shaping. Okay. So the two main ways of, how I use a compressor is, first of all, you have like leveling, okay? So making audio track, in this case the vocal, more consistent. So all the words are consistent in the mix. The next way is to use a compressor as a sound design tool, okay? So when you have the actual attack and release knobs, you can actually mold and shape a sound. And this is where a compressor actually gets really, really fun. If we talk about like a kick drum, for example, so a word that you'll hear a lot when dealing with a compressor is what's called the transient. And the transient is like the beginning of a sound. So if you think about like a snare hit or a kick drum, it's just like the actual initial hit. And with a compressor, you can control and manipulate this transient to either emphasize it or to kind of reduce it. And that's just with the attack, okay? So for example, with the attack, if you open it up, you're allowing the transient through. And if we talk about a kick drum, for example, so you are actually allowing the transient through. So you're allowing the kick drum to kind of hit you in the chest. That's kind of how I like to describe it. But if you are aggressive on your settings, your threshold and ratio, you're actually going to be clamping down on the body. So what that means is that the kick drum might hit you in the chest, but it doesn't have its body anymore. It doesn't have its length, its tail. And typically, your kick drum is going to get lost in the mix. If you make a faster attack, you're actually going to be squashing the transient and you're going to be making the kick drum actually longer. Now, for a more advanced approach, you could actually be using like parallel compression, if you want to kind of help that actual kick drum kind of hit you in the chest a little bit more, kind of treat it like a transient shaper, or if you want to actually kind of squash it to make that kick drum sound a little bit fuller, that approach is available, but it's just a little bit of a more advanced concept, okay? So let's just talk a little bit about, how a compressor works in a sense of, your threshold, your ratio, your attack, and release, okay? So how a compressor works is it will not turn on until your audio actually goes over that threshold, okay? And then you will not have gain reduction unless you have a ratio amount set. Now, this is where people dumb down a compressor, and this is where it kind of, because they dumb it down so much, it makes it hard to understand, okay? So just to keep it simple, let's say we have our threshold, okay? And the thing is, when it comes to a compressor, it's like I can't just give you numbers and, they're going to translate to any piano sound or any guitar sound. And the reason for that is because, every recorded signal has different levels, okay? So for example, if I say, put your threshold to -15, it's like, well, it's all relative to the actual audio that's being, ran through that compressor, okay? So just to keep things simple, let's say we've, adjusted our threshold, and let's say our audio goes over by 10 decibels, okay? If we set our ratio 2:1, now in theory, we should have only 5 decibels that go over that threshold, which means that our gain reduction meter also has 5 decibels, okay? Now, this is the thing where it's kind of confusing to somebody, because now when we have our attack and release settings, this is what dictates how fast or how slow your compression actually starts to happen. And to take it even further, I think it's the Attack magazine. You can check them out on Google. They're a pretty popular, web website. I don't really know too much about them, but I do remember reading this article, and they are the only place where I've ever read this information about a compressor. And that article said something about like 2/3 of your actual desired ratio. And I just always found that interesting because I haven't read that anywhere else. But to keep this simple, okay, so again, if your audio goes over the threshold, then we have a 2:1 ratio, okay? Now your attack determines how long it takes to get to like that desired ratio, okay? And the thing is, if your audio goes over the threshold really, really fast, then your compressor may not have time to clamp down hard enough, okay? So you may never really get to that desired ratio amount. You know what I'm saying? So for example, if your audio goes over that threshold by 10 decibels, but it happens really, really quick, and if you have a slower attack, you may never really get that full amount of compression. So maybe you want to dial in a higher ratio. Okay, so again, now your attack just determines how fast or slow your compressor is going to actually reach that desired amount. And then again, you can get creative with this attack knob, because you're affecting like the transient. Now, here is how the release works, okay? So it's kind of tricky. So the release doesn't kick in until your audio actually goes back under the threshold, okay? What's happening is your audio is still being compressed depending on your release timing, okay? So if you have a longer release, that means that once the audio actually goes under the threshold, your audio continues to compress, but it's slowly going back to its original volume. Sometimes it can like bring up like the actual sound of the room. And on some compressors, a lot of compressors nowadays, they have it like programmed inside of it where you can't get distortion by having too fast of a release. But some compressors, if your release is too fast, you can actually get distortion because from my readings and stuff like that, what happens is the compressor starts to follow like the single cycles of these waveforms, and it just starts causing like distortion. So if you're getting distortion, just increase your release time and it'll go away. When you have a longer release time, you just kind of have a little bit more control over that audio. So these are even things where I even have to train my ears and learn more as well. But just in general, that's kind of how a compressor works. Okay. So, you have your threshold. When the audio goes over your threshold, depending on your ratio amount, I just think of, do I want to be more aggressive? Do I want more control? And then I also think about, what's the purpose of me using this compressor on this sound? Am I wanting it to actually kind of balance out that sound? Do I want it to be more consistent in the mix, or do I want to be creative with it and kind of play with that transient or bring up like the room sound or, and that's just to do with like the attack and the release. Okay. Now I'll also mention the knee. Okay. So this is going to be a little bit hard without actually seeing a visual, but so when you have a hard knee, it's just more strict, okay? So when your actual audio goes over that threshold, then your compressor actually kicks in and it starts working. When you have a soft knee, so for example, let's say we're talking at -15, okay? So if we had a hard knee at -15, then that means that your audio actually has to go over -15. Let's say it went to -10. Yes, your compressor is going to kick in. Now, let's say you had a soft knee, okay? And again, our threshold's at -15, but a soft knee actually starts compressing even before -15. So it would be, maybe like -18 or even a little bit lower. So you can actually be getting compression happening even though your audio isn't going over -15 with a soft knee. And the reason for this is, some people think it sounds a little bit more natural because it kind of gradually builds up. So again, that's just kind of how a knee works. And some compressors have like kind of a hard knee option and a soft knee option. Some actually allow you to have like a variable knob so you can kind of dial in the knee that you want. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So I want to talk to you about two of my golden rules which I've discovered producing music over these years. Okay, so with a compressor, it's really important that you level match. And this isn't just with the compression, it's with EQ and other effects too. And so the thing is, when something sounds louder, typically we think it sounds better. Okay. So, for example, if you're mastering a track and, you listen to the one that's a little bit louder, typically, you lean to the one that's louder, it sounds more, energetic, but that doesn't mean that it is actually better. Okay. So when it comes to using a compressor, you want to make sure that you're setting your volume. So for example, when you have gain reduction, you have to be making sure that you use makeup gain. And sorry, I didn't talk about makeup gain with a compressor, okay? So again, let's just go back for a second. So we have our threshold, our audio goes over. We have our ratio. Let's say we had 5 decibels of gain reduction. So now in theory, you should be, having 5 decibels of makeup gain so that your actual compressed track is the same volume, but now it's just balanced, okay? But the reason why I say in theory is because just because you have 5 decibels of gain reduction doesn't mean that you actually want to have 5 decibels of makeup gain, because when you actually go to turn the compressor off and on, this is what's going to dictate the actual makeup gain that you want to set. Okay, so what I mean is, so let's say we put a compressor on a vocal, okay? We're listening to it, and so now, yes, it's turned down the volume. So now what you want to do is, increase your makeup gain. Let's say the gain reduction meter said 5 decibels. I might start with maybe, let's say 3.5 to 4 decibels of makeup gain, and then I'm going to turn the plugin off and on, and that's going to give me a fair volume comparison, okay? So I want to listen for before and after that they are the same volume. Now, you don't want to spend tons of time on this, especially like, if you're mixing a track, you don't want to spend tons of time because it's, you're going to waste time. Mixing's all about, the speed and flow, it's a process, right? But if you're just doing this just to learn, so when you turn a plugin off and on, try to get it as close as you can. That fair volume comparison. The reason for this is now you can actually accurately compare the before and after, okay? And an awesome way to learn a compressor is just to be really aggressive with it. So with a compressor, your ratio, so, if we go like 2-to-1 or 4-to-1, those are typically, good starting points. 4-to-1's getting a little bit aggressive, 8-to-1's even getting way more aggressive. And then, again, in theory, anything over 10-to-1 is you're getting into like a limiter, okay? So a limiter is pretty much the same thing as a compressor, except it's way more aggressive, okay? So to train your ear, be aggressive with this compressor, put it to that 10-to-1 ratio, bring down that threshold, but just make sure that your volume is the same when you turn it off and on, and you'll actually be able to start training your ear for what you're listening for, okay? Now, in a real world practice, this is what I would do even when I'm mixing a track. And again, it's just going to allow you to make more accurate decisions in your mix, because now you can actually get a fair comparison to the before and after. Like, is your compressor actually benefiting your music? Because a compressor is actually such a powerful tool. You can suck the life out of your actual music. You can bring up unwanted noise. Okay, so, a compressor is really powerful, but you just want to make sure that you're having a fair volume comparison. Now, the next golden rule that I always like to do when using a compressor is using the A and B comparison, okay? So most compressors, not all, but for example, like FabFilter's Pro C or in FL Studio, the Fruity Limiter, it has an A and B comparison. So instead of turning the plugin actually off and on, you can actually compare against two different settings. So for example, let's say, you had a high ratio, okay, but your threshold doesn't come down very low. So in other words, any audio that goes over that threshold, you're compressing it quite hard, but not much audio is going over, okay? So again, that's kind of like a high threshold, high ratio, okay? And then maybe you want to also approach it maybe like a low threshold. So in other words, you go down like -24, -30, but then you have a low ratio, okay? And when you go A and B, you can compare between them. Again, you want to make sure it's a fair volume comparison, and you can hear, are you actually benefiting the music? Are you giving it a different sound? Is it the way that you're wanting to go? And many times I'll try like both ways. I'll be aggressive with one, or, when you're working with the attack and stuff too, like you can start dialing that in. So for example, you can have like a higher ratio and a longer attack, or you can have like a faster attack and like, a smaller ratio. These are just things to play around with and be creative with. So by level matching, making sure that when the plugin's off and on, that is a fair volume comparison, and then also comparing between A and B, these are awesome ways for you to make more accurate decisions in your mix. And these will actually be decisions that you're going to keep moving with, okay? Rather than, kind of soloing out a sound. That's kind of like another golden rule that I always talk about is mixing in solo is very dangerous, okay? So for example, let's say there's that piano and you just can't get it to stand out. You're like, oh, well, I'm going to put a compressor on it, right? Now, again, you want to make sure that you have that fair volume comparison. But if you're going to actually solo out the sound, it's very, very dangerous, because anything that you're processing, with that piano, and let's say you spend, 5-10 minutes with it in solo, now you're going to bring it back into the mix. It's like, how do you know that what you just did to that piano is actually going to flow with your mix, okay? So you always want to reference back and forth between, if you, like, the thing is you can mix in solo, but you have to do it quick, okay? So if you take that piano, you solo it out, you put some, compression on it, you want to bring it back into the mix, and you just want to reference back and forth, okay? Again, turning that plugin off and on, listening for, am I actually benefiting my music, okay? Now let's just talk about, some kind of like advanced forms of like compression. And typically when you hear, someone say, oh, put a compressor on it, what they're actually talking about is what's called downwards compression, okay? So any audio that goes over that threshold, you're actually reducing its volume, okay? And then in your gain reduction meter, then you use makeup gain to bring that volume back to where it was, but now your actual audio is more consistent. In the case of, like, let's say we're doing volume balancing, not so much like the molding and shaping, right? But still, even the molding and shaping, when people talk about a compressor just in general, is typically downwards compression. But the more advanced forms of compression is what's called like upwards compression. And instead of actually turning down the loud parts, you actually bring up the quiet parts. And it's just kind of a different mindset. It's very, very interesting. And in all honesty, it's very, very confusing when you want to go dial in these settings for like the first time. A really awesome plugin is by FabFilter. It's called Pro MB. I'll actually leave a link for you in the resource section for this episode. And it allows you to use like upwards compression and stuff like that. And again, it's a very, very unique way to look at audio. And when you were dealing with more advanced concepts, many times this is what these mastering engineers are even using as well. And it's very, very beneficial because you can still get like those peaks, within like your music, but you're bringing up more like the body. Okay, so that's very, very creative if you're not aware of it. Okay, I think that's this episode on compression. Again, if you want more information about how to use a compressor with some real kind of audio examples, starting points, and what to listen for, again, just check out the course. It's called "Why Do We Producers Use Compression?" And I break down again from a beat maker and producer standpoint of how we actually use a compressor in our everyday lives, making our beats, mixing our music, and everything that pertains to compression with, making beats. So hopefully you guys like this episode. Hopefully you learned a lot. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Thanks for checking out the episode. If you had any questions, visit itsgratuitous.com/podcast, select an episode, and submit your question at the bottom of the page to the contact form. If you'd like to take my FL Studio courses, see my current studio and podcasting gear, read my books, or are interested in lessons, visit the link itsgratuitous.com/learning. That page will redirect you to more info and resources. I hope the best with your productions. I'm Gratuitous, and I'll see you in the next episode.